Hello, and welcome to my Precision Teaching Podcast. It is January, and I am Rick Cabina. I would like to introduce my co-host starting now, and that is Doug Kostewicz.
Heidi-ho, everyone.
Welcome, Doug. Today's a new day. You and I are going to be podcast buddies from here on out.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to have a lot of fun, and perhaps we'll learn something.
That is I just think you have our new motto, having fun learning something.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, as I like to do on all of the podcasts, I'd like to start off with some announcements. And I suppose probably the biggest announcement is, well, aside from welcome to 2009, is talking about the past conference. The International Precision Teaching Conference was held in New Brunswick. That's right, isn't it? New Brunswick?
New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Right, New Brunswick, New Jersey, at the lovely campus of Rutgers. And the conference was, I think, an unqualified success. Wait.
I would agree.
Unqualified was the wrong word. Smashing? Or maybe unqualified was the right word.
Unqualified works. Smashing works.
Okay. Whatever. It was a great conference. I got there. I missed the first day, but I was there the second and the third day. And with the conference, we had Hank Pennypacker was there the first day and gave a very well-received address. And by the way, it just so happens that Hank is going to be our interview today.
Wow.
And let's see, the conference, we had chart share at the conference. We had a number of very good presentations. There was a social event. The Terry Harris presentation was another very, very good talk given. And for those of you who don't know Terry Harris was a young man who was born with cerebral palsy and was significantly impaired, was told, basically, the doctors told his mom that he would never walk and he would never talk, and basically that he should be institutionalized. Well, Terry Harris worked with Eric Houghton, and really probably one of the most amazing stories in precision teaching. When you see him now, he is a bright, articulate person, and it really speaks to the power of getting in there and working very hard. So Terry Harris recounted the stories of what it was like growing up and what it was like working with Eric Houghton, and it was just an amazing, amazing story.
Definitely.
Let's see. Conferences, anything jump out at you for the conference when you were there, Doug?
Well, sadly, I had to teach Thursday night, so I was only able to come in Friday, and by the time I got there, I'd missed most of Friday. So really, I attended Saturday, and it was great. Even a lot of people stayed. I know that we were the last presentation, and there were a few others, and from my understanding, we had quite a few people, and that's a lot to say about a community that stays to not only see the last presentations, but they're well attended. So that was exciting to see that people were staying around and were still interested in what was going on.
That's a really good point. I have attended a number of conferences, and certainly when you are the last day of the conference, or the last, not just the last day, but one of the last presentations, people are clearing out and they're looking to go home. But you're right, there were still a number of people there, and the feedback was good. So I think that does speak to the type of people that are interested in precision teaching and that go to the conference.
I think it'll be a good and almost a good segue into telling us about or getting us ready for the next conference. I know that that'll be coming up sooner than we think.
Yes, that is correct. And that would move us into the next announcement, which is the International Precision Teaching Conference this year will be held at your alma mater, well, one of your alma maters, Penn State.
One of the three.
Yeah, I always like to tease Doug. Doug's been kind of a vagabond. He did his undergrad at Allegheny, then he went to Ohio State, and then he went to Penn State. So Doug's had a very fun traveling journey.
And now I work for Pitt, so.
Right. And he cheers for Michigan.
Yeah, no, not anymore. Not anymore.
You saw the light finally.
I do. Well, I'm gonna just stick with Pitt now for everything.
Good for you. Well, I suppose we should probably keep on track.
Yes.
What was I saying?
You were talking about where the conference is going to be in 2009.
Right. Conference will be hosted at Penn State in State College, or actually it'll be at University Park. University Park is and it's people always are like, wait, State College? And yes, State College is actually the area that surrounds Penn State, and Penn State has its own, I don't know, I guess because they have their own post office and their other services, I don't know what, I guess they're their own little mini city or something, but the university is actually University Park.
Right.
So the dates are October 29th, the 30th, and the 31st of 2009, and we will be at the Nittany Lion Inn, which is, I'll tell you what, I'm really excited to be at the Nittany Lion Inn. That is just a great conference center.
It's beautiful.
I think everyone will enjoy that, and we will have a great cast of characters as usual. And this year, I haven't, this will probably be an announcement that I can make in maybe a month or so, but I am in talks with lining up some very wonderful speaking guests for our conference. The theme of the conference this year is going to be science related, and what I'm trying to do is get some people in science to talk to our group. And of course, the science and what they talk about will be related to precision teaching in some way. And I'm really excited about some of the people that, I don't want to drop any names right now because it's a little premature, but let me say this, if the one person comes, it is going to be really exciting.
Good. I'll be looking forward to hear who that is.
Let's see. We talked about the conference. We talked about the one that's coming this year. And am I forgetting any updates? I think that's about it for right now.
I think you may want to talk about JPTC, though.
Well, yeah, I could update people on JPTC. We have been playing catch-up for a while, and JPTC 05, well, I talked about that. That's been out. 06 is at the publishers, and 07 will hopefully be out, I'm going to say, in February with any luck, and then 08 should probably be out in March or April, which would mean 09 will be on schedule, and the journal will be finally caught up, and all of the changes that we had with moving from editors, all of the transition, all of the files that were moved, everything as far as the journal is concerned will be up to date. So that's a good update, and that's something that I think many people will look forward to when the journal gets back on a regular schedule.
We deserve a pat on the back for that.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. And I'll pat you right back since you are a consulting editor and have reviewed articles and have helped out in other ways with the journal also.
Well, thank you.
This is just a love fest tonight, Doug.
I want to reach out and give someone a hug. So
yeah, we'll have to hug ourselves.
That's right. That is exactly right.
Well, let's move on to
Definitely.
our next part, our next feature of the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
which is the article review. And I like to have an article that focuses in on a concept, and the article that Doug and I have read is actually one that's I'm very familiar with since I'm one of the authors on it, and that is an article on learning channels that was published in 2000, and this was written by myself and my and your advisor when we were both at Ohio State, John Cooper. And the article basically is a primer, very short article written for teachers that talks about how to use learning channels. And just to take a step back and explain what learning channels are to our audience, learning channels are the sensory inputs that we would encounter when let's say stimuli that's coming in, anything that's coming in, and when we respond, how we respond to that, that would be the physical output. So a sensory input, if I'm hearing something and I respond to that by saying something, then that learning channel is hear, say. Learning channels are, I think, one of the very unique aspects of precision teaching. And, of course, learning channels aren't to be confused with learning styles or learning preferences. All learning channels are if you look at the article, which will be posted on the website, you will see that the learning channels are basically, the learning channel matrix is just a description of what we take in and what comes out. I guess that's a very simple way of saying it. Do you have anything to add to that description?
Not to the initial description, no, but I found the article very interesting. It was a good refresher, but it made me think about some things I hadn't thought about in a long time.
Oh. Such as?
Well, I don't know how deep to go into it right at the moment, but I just felt that in now on the other side of the fence as the professor, in interacting with pre-service teachers and trying to get across the idea of generality, it is one of the best ways to program for generality, which is just a reminder, generality is being able to perform the behavior under different situations or functionally related behaviors that are slightly different, or being able to do things once the teaching has stopped, but being able to set it up so that the student that you're working with, it's a layperson way to communicate to others and to get the teacher thinking about, how can I get this student to, say, greeting someone, all the different ways. And without going into a lot of jargon, we can think about it and say, okay, what's our input? What's our output? Let's begin to arrange these in such a way. I found myself remembering a lot, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't cover it more, because one of the things that I'll be teaching is generality. So it was exciting to remember that and be refreshed on that.
That's a good point. You said a couple things that are very important and I suppose characteristics of precision teaching. One of the things that you talked about was how the learning channels are plain English. And Lindsley, in fact, wrote papers and tried to make the whole, a big part of precision teaching plain English. And one of the things that I remember Og saying, and I suppose that's probably actually, now that I'm thinking about it as a little side note, talking about plain English would be a good article to read for our next podcast. But one of the things that Og was fond of saying is that when you communicate, you want to use simple words, and not just simple words, but words that, if you had I remember him talking about positive reinforcement. So he would show how many syllables are in positive reinforcement. Positive, that's 3, right?
Yeah.
Reinforcement. That would be 7 if I'm counting those correctly.
3 and 4.
Pardon me?
That's 3 and 4. You're right. 7.
Yeah. And he used the word, instead of positive reinforcement, a plain English term would be reward. 2 syllables. And he would talk about negative reinforcement, and he used the word relief. And it was interesting, that's, as I said, that's a whole nother topic we can talk about, but what you're saying is that teachers want things that they can understand, and if we can communicate to them in a very straightforward manner with plain English, then that is important, because then they can actually get to the crux of what we're trying to say and use whatever it is whatever information we're trying to share with them. So learning channels, as you point out, is a way not only for teachers to describe the behavior, but it also helps us plan for different ways of teaching behaviors.
It gives the teacher ideas right off the bat in such a way that they're almost forced to think about things rather than going through their notes or trying to remember what they learned. Something as simple as this matrix, how many of these are they covering for a student, especially one with some severe disability needs, and you can cover as many of these as possible. And I just think that was a great refresher for me, and something that I'm going to include from now on.
Good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the article.
Okay.
The article, let's see here. The article starts off just talking about Eric Houghton was the one who originated the idea of learning channels and the learning channel matrix. And there are actually, I had in my position 3 different types of matrices. When I wrote this article, the one matrix that I shared was the one that's called academic, personal, and social development. So the inputs and the outputs were specific to those behaviors, to personal, social, and academic. So on the input side, think, touch, taste, sniff, see, hear, feel. And then on the output, aim, do, draw, emote, think, so on and so forth. There are other matrices out there, 2 others that I had that I didn't talk about, but one was the mobility matrix, and that had some different outputs. Of course, the inputs are going to always be the same, because as humans, we only have so many ways that we can bring information in through our sensory modalities. And then there was an activity matrix. This article just talks about how do you use the academic, personal, social development matrix. And pretty easy to use, and it's something that if you sit down with a teacher or you sit down with anyone who's interested in using this, it's, I think, a straightforward way of teaching it to someone. You take a behavior that you're thinking of teaching, and then you say, okay, how's the student going to take the information in, and how are they going to respond to it? And if you look at the learning channel matrix, it would be as simple as saying, okay, here's the input, here's the output, and then where those 2 connect, you could write in that little cell on the matrix what the behavior is. Say reading second grade text or something like that would be an example. You would see the text, you would say what the words are, and there you have it.
Yeah.
Very straightforward. That's how you use them. Now, another part of the article talks about why should you use the learning channels. And you already talked about one of those ideas, and you mentioned generality, and that is something that is a pretty big concern. We don't want
Mm-hmm.
we want students to have wide generality with what we teach them,
Right.
wide ranging. And some other ideas here would be, if you think about this, and this is actually, this is something that I was in a classroom just the other day that I really brought this home, and that is, you could use different channels to practice the skill or to acquire the skill differently. And I'll just give you an example. There was a young man that had a severe disability, autism. He was on the spectrum, and he was on the more severely impaired side. And one of the things that we were trying to teach him was quantity to number. So let's say you have two things, and we want the student to be able to recognize that that's two. Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways that could be done. The way they were basically doing this with him, or the way they were teaching it with him, was they would have, let's say, two bottle caps, or whatever, two objects. They had different types of objects. They would show him the objects, and then he would have to select the number 2. So if you think about that, what would that be? Well,
let's see. C.
Yep, he's seeing something. He's seeing two things.
Select?
Yep, see select. So that's one channel right there, see select. Now, another way to do this would be, let's say we didn't show him anything, but we said 2. And then there was the number 2 that he, again, had to select. What would that be?
Here, select.
Right. Or another way is, let's say we take the back of his hand and we tap 2 times. And he asked, what would that be?
Would that be touch?
Yep. Touch.
Touch, select.
Right there, we have 3 different inputs with the one output. And then again, we could change the output. Let's say, going back to the C, now he's non-vocal, so we can't do C say with him, but we could have him maybe C write. So if we said, here's 2 bottle caps, write the number, and he would write a 2, that would be C write. Then again, we could say, if we said to him 2, and he wrote the 2, that would be, I said that wrong.
Be C.
If he sees the 2, and then we say, write what this is, and he wrote it, that would be C write.
Now, if you would ask him and say, all right, you tell him to, and then to draw 2 bottle caps, would that be the here draw, or would that, because you're drawing the pictures at that point?
We say,
you say
draw 2, yes.
Draw 2 bottle caps, and he draws 2 bottle caps. But if you say write the number 2, or draw the number 2, or trace the number 2, now that would be different, tracing the number 2, right? Because it would be C. Well, no, would that be a C or a here? Or am I splitting hairs?
Well, it depends on how you're instructing. If you just want someone to trace something, that would be like maybe either a C write or a C draw, depending on how we define write and draw. If we restrict write to actually forming something, whereas if we call drawing anytime the person's making different marks, and we had tracing that was part of that, then it might fit under there. It just depends on what we would call that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why you might want to use it. There are some other reasons. And let me see here. Communicating. I always think this is a neat idea. When you are with a number of people and you are all talking the same language, that's really important because it cuts down on miscommunication. It cuts down on having problems with trying to figure out why the student might be having an issue, and it might also help other people come up with different ideas. And if you're using the learning channel language, which is basically just a description of the behavior, a more precise description of the behavior, then that's helping you communicate better. And of course, you're using plain English. I remember listening to Carl Binder speak once, and he talked about learning channels, and he gave the example of he was working with some corporation, I can't remember which one it was, and he said that the training that they gave was computer-based. So the people who were going through this training were customer service representatives, and their job was to answer questions. And what they would do for their training is they would sit down at this computer terminal, and let's say there was, a scenario that was typed there. So you read the scenario, and then you say, okay, which one of these selections is your response? So that would be a what?
That would be a C right.
Okay. Or a C right, C tap, I suppose if you're I don't know what that's a good question. If you're using a computer, maybe it'd be C type?
Yeah, it would be C-type because I always think back to the lowest common denominator, and someone who does not have skills to write but can type on a keyboard may produce similar looking behaviors but not be able to do both.
Yeah. So let's call it a C right. Right's not on this particular output, but that's okay. It could be put on there if we wanted it to. But so back to the Carl Binder story, these people were being taught C type. But guess what they had to do in the real-life situation?
They had to hear say.
Exactly. So if people were using learning channels, it would have been very obvious that the instruction that they were getting to do their job did not match up with the requirements of the real world. And I think that's really important because think about education. If we teach students, let's say math facts, we teach them in the C-say channel, that is not the same thing in the C-right channel. And it seems hard for people to grasp that sometimes because it seems like, okay, because I can do it this way, I should automatically be able to do it the other way. Some people, it does work that way, but you can't say that for everybody. And I've worked with kids with disabilities who you teach them one way, and then you think they would get it the other way, but it just doesn't work that way. And that's one of the interesting discoveries that precision teachers made, which is learning is very specific. And if we pay attention to the learning channels, then when we're communicating with others, it's very clear what's going on with the behavior.
Well, I think a really solid example, and it may not be to a learning channel, but the knowing that kids can't do things both ways is taking a math equation horizontal than vertical. And many kids with disabilities, they can do it only one way. And they've only experienced a horizontal math problem. As soon as you lay it on its side, they don't know what to do. So that's a simplistic example. It may not be a different learning channel, but even within that learning channel, there's some variation.
Behavior is specific. That is for sure.
Yes.
Well, one other thing I'd like to talk about, and that is about why I use learning channels. I mean, there are other arguments here, but I do want to get on to our interview pretty soon. And that is facilitating planning for instruction and practice. And at the past conference, Elizabeth Houghton, who was married to Eric, actually did she did a number. Whenever she talks, I should just say, you want to see her. She is by far one of the best presenters, I think, of precision teaching. She's enthusiastic. She knows her stuff backward and forward. And just a master teacher. But she was talking about Learning Channel. She was doing a presentation on it, and she said something which really it struck me. And she was talking about Eric, and she was telling the story that when Eric taught a college course to teachers, one of the activities that he would have the teachers do is he would pick something that they wanted to teach, and he would have the teachers fill out every single cell of the Learning Channel matrix for that one activity. And I thought that was really just a great idea, because that would force you to think about all the different ways of teaching. And if you go into classrooms, most of the time what you see is instruction tends to be very channel specific, and there aren't a variety of ways that people necessarily teach, and that could be important to consider for some learners.
And one thing I don't know if you mentioned it, I've been paying attention. When you vary it across these channels, it becomes fun.
Yes.
And the same thing, it doesn't become tedious for them. So the students, they've heard it all the same way over and over. So in just varying up, although it's the same behavior or similar, I'm drawing a blank, but the idea is it just varies across. It just is fun. It becomes fun for the kids.
Doug, that's your motto. Learning. What did I say it was? I've already forgot it.
Well, when you listen to it again, you remember what our motto is.
Learning and fun. Do both.
Yeah.
Well, that is the article review, and if any of you out there have any questions or comments, or there are things that you'd like us to read and talk about, please, by all means, drop us a line through email. And with that, I would like to go to the interview. The interview this week is with Hank Pennypacker, and for those of you who don't know Hank has been another one of the veteran precision teachers who was there when it was created, and even beyond that, I think probably the biggest compliment I could pay to Hank is that he is a true scientist. And when I think about what scientists do, something that I always try, and I try to emulate what scientists do because I consider myself a scientist, but Hank certainly is he's a scientist, and he's many things beyond that. He's a behavior analyst, he's a precision teacher, but certainly listening to him speak and looking at his body of work, science is really at the forefront, and I think that is a remarkable and wonderful way to conduct research and conduct yourself as a professional. So I'm blabbering here. I should probably stop and go on and get to the interview. So with that, let's listen to the interview. I would like to welcome our next interview, which is with Dr. Hank, as we know him, Pennypacker. And Hank, welcome to my podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
And I always like to start off my interview with just having people give us a background. So could maybe you tell us, how did you get interested in precision teaching, and maybe share a little bit of your history?
Well, we could share too much of my history, and that would take us through the entire interview period. We should probably, though, begin with my first meeting with Ogden Lindsley, which took place in September of 1961 while I was still in graduate school. I was attending the meetings of the Psychonomic Society held at Columbia University, and that was in the fall of '61. And in those days, psychonomics met in conjunction with the APA, so it was always in the same city. One morning, my doctoral mentor, Gregory Kimball, met my wife and I as we were coming down to breakfast. And he said something like, "You see that guy over there with the red hair?" Yeah. He said, "Well, I want you to meet him." So he introduced me to Ogden. And he said later, he said, "Beware of the reincarnation of Mephistopheles." I'll never forget that phrase. And so I listened with fascination as Ogden was talking to other great names in the field. And, of course, I was a lowly graduate student just standing there on the periphery. And then the psychonomics meetings broke up. I don't think I said more than 2 words to him at that initial encounter. But then later in the week, during the APA meetings, somehow or other we all wound up in a penthouse on 52nd Street owned by a fellow named Charles Raymond, who had been a student of Kenneth Spence's. Now, one must understand that as a student of Kimball's, I was a Spence grand student and a Hull great-grand student. So this was my tradition. Never met or heard of Charles Raymond because he sort of bolted the camp and went into industry and was making a fortune in market research. But in any case, he had this big party going on in his penthouse on 52nd Street, and probably 2:33 in the morning. Suddenly I hear this booming baritone voice coming out of some room in the back of the place, singing country western songs from the top 40 charts of the late 40s, early 50s. Well, it turned out that I had been playing guitar in that period of time in Montana, and of course Ogden had been doing the same thing, making a skimpy living in the coffee houses in Boston. So I walked back there and just sat down beside him and joined in, because he and I were the only 2 people in New York City probably who knew the lyrics to some of those songs. And we just looked at each other, and it was kind of an instant bond. And that's how it really all began. But I went back to Duke, and he went back to Harvard. And then I took a job here at the University of Florida. Ogden came down that first fall to give a talk in the psychiatry department, and because I knew him slightly, I was elected to have the party. And of course, Ogden, any party with Ogden is a memorable event. And he came back a number of other times while we were here. And on each occasion, we would have one of these parties. But as we got to know each other better, he started to, I wouldn't say tutor me, but explore with me some other strategies for doing research with behavior, other than those that I had learned as a Hull student, Spence student, Kimball student. And one of the first things that struck me was he told me that it was perfectly possible to do large N research with only one subject. The large N came from the number of observations. And then he gently guided me to read Claude Bernard, to reread Murray Sidman, and so forth and so on. And sort of the hook got sunk there. And I began to slowly change what I was doing. The main reason I think I switched was this worked. I got, later on, I had a fortunate event with a person called me. I was doing research in this period of time with monkeys. We're trying to set up a token economy because I wanted to study taxation. I wanted to see how lean a schedule of reinforcement we could maintain earning behavior on if we were causing the monkeys to periodically, at the sound of a siren and a hole opening up in the floor, take their tokens and throw them down the hole so they couldn't spend them. That, incidentally, did not meet with favor with the National Science Foundation, but it was good exercise in developing a token economy with free-ranging Cebus monkeys. Anyhow, I was doing that when the phone rang one day, and it was a man from Jacksonville asking me if I could help with his autistic son. And I said, I have no experience in this whatsoever. I'm an experimental psychologist. How did you get my name? He said he got it from the president of the Georgia Society for Autistic Children. I said, and I figured, Og's up to it again. And they'd done this to me. Now I'm sort of on the spot. Well, make a long story short, I met with this fellow, had him come over to Gainesville, taught him how to chart, which is the only thing I knew, and I said, I'm not going to take any fee for this or anything, but I'll be happy to consult with you. Together, we'll look at your chart every week or so and see what's happening. And so that happened, and he started out pinpointing the self-mutilation, arm biting of his 5-year-old son. And within about 4 weeks, we'd gotten rid of that. And then a whole number of other things came in. He started a little school over in Jacksonville in the basement of a church. And then we had a parent class start over here, and he would come over every Thursday with a carload of people and all shared charts and so forth. This is actually written up in a little bit in Phil Hiltz's book called Behavior Mod, which came out, back in about that period of time, late 60s, early 70s. But I said, gee, this is really neat. This works. And long about then, I was fortunate to have one of my graduate students, Jim Johnston, switched out of clinical, and together he and I designed an application of what had by then become Ogden's precision teaching. And I'm skipping a lot of his history here, but this took place in '69. We designed a variation of that to use with college students. And of course, to show you how scholarly I am, we completely ignorant of what Fred Keller was doing at the same time. I can't say completely. I saw the first issue of JABA, but really didn't pay much attention to it. And because we were busy designing this thing, and it was very much like Keller's. I'd take a sip of coffee there. Very much like Keller's procedure, except, of course, we used frequency as our unit of measurement, and we used continuous daily charting, whereas Keller used percent correct, and as far as I know, measurement was fairly infrequent. Anyhow, that led to a major publication in the American Psychologist, and we were kind of on our way.
I think so when you were working with that father and his son, what year was that? That was the late 60s?
That was late 68. Late 68.
And that was with the standard behavior chart as it would have
Yes,
been
it was.
then?
Yeah, I need to interject here another major event because it really is critical, and it shows Ogden's style in a way that I think very few people have experienced it. It was in either 1966 or 67. Now, mind you, by this point we were communicating, and I had slowly moved the emphasis of the experimental psych program here into operant conditioning. I persuaded the chairman that we needed an operant conditioner, and I was head of experimental, so we hired first one and then another. And anyway, but I was quite put off by, frankly, the whole notion of getting into education per se. I mean, that was kind of a lower caste operation, and I had not been too praiseworthy of, no, that's the wrong word. I did not praise highly Ogden's decision to go to Kansas. He told me what he was doing and why, and okay, fine, it's your life, but I don't think I'd do that, and so on. Anyway, in, I think it was 66 or 67, he had arranged with the powers that be in the College of Education Department of Special Education to come down here and do a workshop. And I was selected by the department chairman to sort of co-coordinate this, only because they needed some support, to put up enough money for the operation from the psych department. So I said, sure. And Bernie Webb, the chairman, said, Og's your friend, and you can do this. You don't have to get involved. Just help out and do what you can, and we'll have one of the parties for him, and then everything will be fine. So, well, here's what happens. This thing is scheduled to come off in March, I think. In January, the hot young gun from special ed, who was the coordinator, was killed in a car accident. He was coming back from Tampa with the dean of the college, a fellow named Kimball Wiles, and the two of them were killed instantly in a head-on collision. Well, it was a very sad event. Doubly so because I now inherited full responsibility for this workshop. Ogden later told me that once Chuck Wood, died, he thought the whole thing was going to be a complete fiasco and a waste of time, and the only reason he did it was to just come down and have one of our parties. but that's later. I took this very seriously and organized under Og's direction what he wanted. What he wanted was essentially a 2-day operation in which on day one he would train a group of people called advisors, from the chart. And this was a full day of intense training with him. And I was to round up the people who were going to be these advisors. And that was, I think I got 10 or 12 or maybe 13 such people. Then on the second day, each advisor would meet with a group of 10, 12, 13, or however many people they could round up, and they would impart this new information to this other group of people. So we have, about a 10 by 10 or whatever multiple. We should have produced, 300, 400 people semi-trained at the end of these 2 days. Well, so the deal was, second day, we had all these rooms arranged all over town. We had church basements and overflow rooms in Elks Lodge and places like that, so that all these people could gather. And all the advisors show up, and Og was going to come and go around and bless everybody. And he was first going to come to the Catholic Church, which was the biggest one, on University Avenue, and greet all of us and get us all excited, and then we would all go to our individual locations and do our thing. Well, 9 o'clock comes, no Og. 9:30 comes, and no Og. 9:45 comes, no Og. I said, well, the hell with this. We got to get this moving or we'll never get anything done. So I just took over and put the people where they went. Og strolls in around noon and wanted to know how things were. I said, well, look around, you son of a bitch. There's people working. There's people learning to chart. There's people working with these principles and stuff. I sure would have liked to have seen you earlier. He said, you would? I said, yes, I would have. He said, well, you seem to be doing all right. And then it hit me. That was one of the greatest shaping maneuvers I have ever seen. I mean, what a huge contingency arrangement, and what a huge gamble. But as he said, he thought the whole thing was a disaster anyway. And I think he just thought it'd be kind of fun to arrange this experimental environment for me to behave in, which I did. And that's how it really got started down here. But I was, by then I was so committed. The day before, I mean, he really taught me an enormous amount, probably as much as I learned in 2 years of graduate school. Just listening to him go through all of the stuff that he had brought to the whole precision teaching operation. And I virtually memorized all of it. And then subsequently used most of it in my courses. I mean, it all just made so much sense. And we would enhance it or modify it based on current literature and so on. But the basic Ogdenisms are just been me ever since. So that I don't in any way regret or hold any grudge for what he did. I've always been in awe of it. But it really was a life-changing experience. And all because this poor guy died. I mean, that never would have happened if Chuck Woods hadn't been killed.
Did that predate his short courses? Because wasn't that the idea?
Yes, it did predate the short courses. He was doing these. I mean, this was kind of like a short course, but it was out on the road. Mm-hmm. And I remember the Kansas short courses went longer than that. We went to one of them in 71 or 2, and I forgot how long it lasted, but I think it was 2 or 3 days. And this thing was, 1 day for the advisors and 1 day for everybody else.
I've been interested in not only that short course idea, but when you look at precision teaching and standard acceleration charting, and you look at that as a overall movement, and you look at the history from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, there seemed to be a really, at the beginning, there was an incredible, what's the word I'm looking for? Explosion, where lots of people were doing it. And then, of course, across time, I suppose some of the people started getting older or retiring. And I'm wondering what you think about what are the variables responsible for that. So the short course, and I've heard Og speak before where he, from what I hear, this is secondhand information, so you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, that sometimes he would discourage publications and really encourage more of a personal contact. So the whole idea about chart parenting and so on. But thinking about that in terms of the movement, the community, the discipline, whatever word would most appropriately fit.
Well, it's certainly true that he discouraged publication. I mean, he was emphatic on that point. Because, as he put it, was a waste of time. You had this tremendous gap between the time you did it, the time you got it written up, and the time you submitted it, and the time it reached print, and then nobody'd read it. And he just felt that that was a very, very poor way to communicate. And he, I've never really talked to him in real depth about this because I don't know, just didn't. But because what I'm going to say is sort of startling. But it seemed to me that what he was doing was engineering the development of a cult, and the charisma that he brought to that was what held it together. One of the things that struck me early on after we got into the behavior bank thing, which incidentally was an idea that he shared with me, I think, here in '68 at one of these trips. And, he said, what if we could marry the power of the high-speed computer to the precision of the chart? And that's it. That saves the world. Well, he says, okay, let's do it. And here comes the behavior bank. Now, he had obviously thought of this before, but he wanted to, get my reaction to it. But one of the things that always astonished me, two things really. One is that people would learn to chart, and you could do a real show, and I got to where I was doing this at that level, or not Og's level, but at a good enough level to get people charting well. And we used it in a lot of evaluation studies that we did commercially and that sort of thing, which required that we get large numbers of teachers charting. But I was always a little fascinated and a little disturbed by the fact that people didn't use the charts. People didn't really look at them. People really didn't make decisions about them from them. They just did this as a sort of ritualistic, compulsive obeisance to the great Ogden. The second thing that happened was once we started the behavior bank, everybody started pushing data into it. Nobody took anything out. Nobody had any questions to ask it. Now, there may have been, financial contingencies that discouraged this and so on and so forth, but he regarded it as a kind of a great failure because the money in, money out concept never happened. And all of us put in thousands of charts. I mean, I don't know how many the ultimate stash there is. It's hundreds of thousands, I think, of pinpoints. And nobody accessed that for anything. I still believe deeply in the concept that it's sort of the ultimate inductive machine for gathering frequencies and accelerations and finding out laws about behavior that can't otherwise be determined. But it hasn't happened yet. I do hope to live long enough to see it begin to happen. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that point now because of advances in computer technology. Mm-hmm. So we keep that dream alive, at least I do. And hope to see that realized. And I think things like AIM chart and what we were trying to do with the bank and our use of it in the evaluations research or applications that we did and so forth, and what I talked about in New Jersey, all make this a kind of at least a reasonably real possibility at some larger than just a one or two school level, but. To me, it goes way beyond what we can learn about education because all of human behavior, as we well know, is subject to display on that chart. And there are, I think, just latent orderliness there to be found that we haven't even begun to think about looking for yet. So it's still a very, very exciting prospect. And that was Ogden's brilliance, it seems to me, in his dream. When he talked about, marrying the power of the computer with the precision of the frequency measure and the chart, it really holds tremendous potential.
How involved were you with the behavior bank? You were an inputter, a person.
Oh yeah, very much so. I had my students doing it. I had people. We'd have courses in my house where we would gather people together, collect the data. I would teach them how to use all the forms that were necessary, and we put in a lot of data.
And the behavior bank has always been something that's intrigued me because it was before my time, and there's not a lot written about it, so I never quite understood what you could get from it. Could you take maybe just a few minutes and describe that process? You would enter data, and then what could you get from it, or what were you supposed to get from it?
Well, what you're supposed to get from it is summary descriptive statistics of what was in there. For example, suppose you just wanted to know, what does the bank know about out-of-seat behavior? Well, you could send in a query, and it would send you back in an organized format the summary descriptive statistics of all the out-of-seat charts. It would tell you how many there were, what the lowest and highest frequencies were in baseline, to use that term. He used before, during, and after. But anyway, you'd get that. You'd get decelerations for all phases. And you would get a description of what contingencies were used to bring about those changes. And you could do that. You could do that for any behavior that you could think of that might be in the bank.
So when people would, so this would just be summary. So would there be averages, or would it be?
Yeah, there'd be averages. Well, averages. I don't remember if we used averages. I think he just used ranges.
That makes sense.
Highest and lowest. I remember those. If I'd known we were going to talk about this, I'd have brought one of those behavior bank summary books in with me, because I've got them all, and we could look at them. But I'm just trying to do them sort of from visual memory. Mm-hmm. But also there were summary descriptions of frequency multipliers and dividers, so you knew the effects quantified of these changes.
Hmm. Yeah, I suppose that would be something that could pretty easily be done now with the amount of storage and websites and so on.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't be a hard project at all to.
Now, of course, the academic community, I should hasten to say, the behavioral academic community was apoplectic about this, because there were from their point of view, there were no controls over the quality of what went into the bank. I mean, we have all these people out there with no training and no credentials and no advanced degrees and so forth, just collecting these data and putting it on charts and sending it in this computer. They I think, firmly believe that you couldn't trust that stuff. Mm-hmm. Ogden was very, very perceptive on that point. He used to say, look, let's pretend we got here a museum, and it's got all these fossilized bird eggs. We're interested in the biggest one, the oldest one, the smallest one. Are there fake bird eggs in here? Maybe. But is that going to matter? Probably not. You know, the collection is so huge that if one or two fakes get in, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he was not going to let this enterprise run aground because of over concern with reliability of measurement as it's now currently misused and so forth and so on. I mean, he just, let's look at all the bird eggs, get as many as we can, see what we got. Very, very inductive, you know, in his approach, and that's what characterized his thinking from Skinner and from Mach.
And that thinking certainly has influenced you, since looking at your number of your contributions, especially, well, most notably the handbook. What were some of the things that you looked at through your career? What were some of the things that interested you as a researcher?
Good question. I have never thought of myself particularly as a researcher in the traditional sense of that. I've always had colleagues who were much more, I thought, dedicated and devoted researchers. What I had always been interested in, it took me a while to discover this because I was taught to do, and go through the motions of doing research, and I did that. But turns out, looking back over all of it, what I was interested in is seeing things work and seeing application that worked. I mean, I was so so taken by the power of operant conditioning, and I was so frequently struck by students whom I could infect with this enthusiasm, but who would then turn to me and say, well, if this is so damn good, why isn't everybody doing it? And I thought, well, now there's a good question, and I really have devoted my life to trying to answer that question. And that's, how we came across, really, just in doing the scholarship for strategies and tactics, the idea that technology lags science or scientific breakthroughs by some, noticeable period of time. And but eventually, it's the benefits to society of the technological implications of any scientific advance that make the scientific advance ultimately acceptable to the worldview of the culture. And you can cite Galileo, you can cite Darwin. We haven't quite got there yet with Darwin, but we're working on it. And certainly finally got there with Galileo. The church recently apologized after 400 years for what they did to him. And of course, eventually, I think we will get there with Skinner, but I'll be long gone. But I wanted to make a contribution along the way to try to hasten that day, which is partly why I broke off from all of this and went into Mamacare. Not because my mother died of breast cancer or anything like that, but because I saw in this problem a way to bring to bear good behavior analysis to the solution of a problem that would benefit the culture, and then eventually bring attention to the science that produced it. And we've lived long enough to see that happen. Mm-hmm. Very slow process, but it is taking hold, and it's there. And this brings me to another point that I started on earlier. I very deliberately and consciously, and the group here that does Mamacare have very deliberately and consciously let Mamacare be the star, none of us. In other words, I do not want this to disappear when I die, or when Mark dies, or when any of us senior people are gone. Mamacare is the winner here. Mamacare is the star of the show, and so we make sure that it gets the credit, not us. Because I don't want to repeat the what I would call maybe the cult mistake or something like that. Mm-hmm. I've seen this happen in medicine. There are people in the breast cancer business especially, because it's such a huge problem with so much money thrown at it. But we have these people who go around and give talks with good data at $10, $15, $20,000 a pop, and they are worshipped and lionized. And what they do, people hardly know. And there is no technology coming out of this for broad general dissemination. There have been, with the exception, I think, of Mamacare, no serious technological contributions for the lay public to grab hold of and do something with. So in other words, we get very high-priced Swedish mammographers who give talks about how mammography is improved. What does that do for the public? Absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. They still have to drag their boobs in and get them slammed between two pieces of metal and shot full of radiation. Mm-hmm. And that's not of any greater benefit now than it was in 1960. You see what I'm saying? So,
yes.
So out of that has not come anything of great benefit to the public. Out of Mamacare has, because we have deliberately made the people who use it and improve it, the beneficiaries.
How big is Mamacare?
Very small. It's tiny. I mean, the little company here, I'm sitting in a building that's got 3,000 square feet, probably an eighth of which is devoted to packing and shipping. You can look us up, mamacare.com, mm-hmm. and see, what we do. You can see our research, and in many ways we're an R&D company. We certainly don't know a damn thing about marketing, except that one principle, which has kind of worked. But what we've brought to the table here is the absolute fanatical adherence to the standards of measurement that I learned from Og and Og learned from Fred. So our measurement is the keystone. And because of that, we have, slowly crept to the top of the pile, since people who do things similar to us in terms of training and so on don't use the measurement, and say they don't have the established standards that we've been able to create. And so we are now, with all due modesty, the world's standard for manual breast examination. Why? Because we can demonstrate through measurement that what we do works. And the rest of the world is kind of caught up in this whole thing about evidence-based medicine, but the term evidence has really slipped badly in meaning since that happened.
That's what you're saying is resonating, because just the other night I was reading a post where someone was talking about evidence-based medicine and was saying how if you really even look at medicine as a field, they have been hijacked by complementary and alternative medicine, which many years ago was called pseudoscience. Or quackery.
Yeah, right.
And because they've changed the term and they've positioned themselves well, it's unbelievable the things that they can get away with now.
I think I may have mentioned this to you in New Brunswick, but if not, it's worth repeating. Or if I did, it's worth repeating. If not, it's worth hearing for the first time. In 2004, I was fortunate enough to go to France with my wife and number 5 granddaughter. And we had lunch with a fellow named Bruno Trumbik, who's a Croatian, but who was also the founding editor of the Journal of Evidence-Based Medicine. And the reason we went to lunch with him is because he worked for an organization called RAND, not our RAND Corporation, but one over in Europe, that bought a large number of our breast models. And I just wanted to meet him and talk about the use that they were going to put them to and so forth. And I was very curious to hear the history of the Journal of Evidence-Based Medicine, which essentially was this, that in Europe, they had this horrible problem of, even worse than here apparently, of dueling experts whose competence was assessed entirely by their vitas, their credentials, their titles in litigation. And so litigation was getting more and more expensive and more dependent upon one's ability to bring to court these very highly decorated and influential, quote, experts. But nobody had any data. And so finally they decided, the medical community over there sort of decided, or a little subgroup of them, hey, wouldn't it be nice if somebody at once came to court with some data so that we could make a better informed judgment? Well, that was the basis of the Journal of Evidence-Based Medicine. And the first several years of that were very effective, and it really changed the way the medical-legal relationship goes on in Europe. However, as Bruno quickly acknowledged, it, like anything else, it deteriorated with use. And so now, over there as here, the word evidence no longer has very much meaning. And now, of course, here we get evidence in education and in behavior analysis, some behavior analysis applications. The term evidence is satisfied by the meeting of a committee, a vote of some committee. Well, Jesus, I mean, that's bizarre. So, we got to stay with the standards of measurement. And people, unfortunately, by and large, aren't taught that and don't know much about it. Now, another point on this that I think is just tragic is that medicine, since maybe the 1930s or the 1940s, has fallen into the agriculture trap. George Snedeker and so forth, instead of and left the wisdom of Claude Bernard. It's just appalling. I mean, what they accept as evidence and data, the results of randomized clinical trials, has nothing whatsoever to do with the treatment of individual patients. And anyone who understands basic inferential statistics knows that it can't. Fisher himself was fond of pointing out that you do not ever make inference from the sample to the single case. Statistical inference is valid from the sample to the population. Now, the clinician is not interested in what's going on in the population. The epidemiologist is, the public health officer is, but the clinician needs to know, what am I going to do with this guy here whose left testicle is 4 times the size of his right testicle? The results of a clinical trial on some drug doesn't really tell him that with any certainty. So, in other words, medicine has no tool in the literature to really help, and so therefore you have this strange fascination with, quote, evidence, which really isn't very useful. So there again, we adhere to our standards of, continuous direct measurement of the single case. And what the clinician, the medical clinician, finally winds up doing is exactly that. Differential diagnosis and treatment is really a very, very elegant single subject experiment in which you try something, see what it does. Watch the data on that individual case. And when that doesn't work, you try something else until you finally get it right. And in the process, when you find out what it is that changed the condition, you've probably gotten a pretty good handle on what caused the condition.
That is a very telling point, especially when I look at my field in education. And this isn't just my field. I suppose this is all the social sciences. And, well, I shouldn't. This is everywhere. But the really popular way of talking about if something is evidenced is through meta-analysis.
Yeah.
Which is just, it seems you can prove anything with a meta-analysis.
Probably. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Well, things like, acupuncture or these alternative medicine, different types of maybe phenomena that people will have maybe weak evidence, and then you pile all that together, and then the next thing you see is, oh, well, this seems to be real because we have this meta-analysis which proves it.
Yeah, but if you take all that and you get down to the actual clinical effect that's represented, it's probably less than 1/10 of 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, is the usual observation about how anything with a large enough N can be made to look significant, but doesn't generate clinical usefulness.
I was always impressed with, in your second book for strategies and tactics, you have a box, and I haven't read, I just got your most recent book, but you talk about an N of 1,000 N of 1s versus one N of 1,000, and I've always liked that argument.
Yeah, and that came out of something I accidentally said on CBS Morning News with Diane Sawyer. And it came out something like this: that we're convinced. Why? She asked me some question about why do you think women would do this better than professionals? She said, professional clinicians, they can't find lumps this small. How come you think women can? I said, well, it comes down to this. I said, you consider the same hand feeling the same breast 1,000 times is going to become much more sensitive to that one breast than even the most educated hand that feels 1,000 breaths only once. And that's kind of the source of that N of 1 versus N of 1,000 point.
Was that comment aired on your interview?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's on CBS.
Oh, that's excellent.
If you want me to, I can probably send you that.
Oh, I would. Yes, I would greatly appreciate that.
I've got the interview on PowerPoint as a video, so I can send that up to you.
Okay, great.
I think. I mean, I say I can.
Well, we could always try.
Yeah.
What you talk about standards of measurement? What do you mean by that?
Well, that's a good question. My usual spiel on this is sort of as follows: that in the natural sciences, first of all, measurement has to be defined and we define it as the act of assigning numbers to and units to objects or events. Numbers and units. Mm-hmm. And then that brings up the question of what characterizes a unit. And in the natural sciences, units have three properties. They are standard, they're absolute, and they're universal. Standard means everybody agrees that this is the one we're going to use. The centimeter is a standard unit of length. They're absolute. They don't change from occasion to occasion, which of course is the great difference between the natural and the social sciences. Social science measurement is flexible. It's as we call it in the first book, vagonautic. It wanders. There's no fixed unit, so that things. I always say, how in the world would you try to land a person on the moon using rubber geometry? And then, of course, the third thing is universal. Everybody agrees that the centimeter is the unit of length. But the centimeter doesn't change, by point two. It doesn't change from day to day or from measurement occasion to measurement occasion. The origins of this problem, as I mentioned in that talk, really go back to Adolphe Quetelet, but were more than reified by Francis Galton when he pointed out that it's from the variability in a natural phenomenon that you can induce units of measurement. Well, you stop and think about that for a moment, and Jesus, that's exactly the wrong thing to do with the variability. The variability is there for you to analyze, not to destroy in the process of making a scale of measurement. So the classic example is intelligence, which is based on variability in the behavior of French school children, which, of course, generated a normal curve. And then Galton and Binet took that curve, mapped it onto a 14-unit scale, and in one fell swoop created both the idea of intelligence, the concept, and gave it formal standing, and then a scale for measuring it. Well, in the process, they destroyed the variability that they should have been attempting to analyze and understand. And education has, in my view, suffered from that impairment ever since the 1870s when this happened. Mm-hmm. And my favorite example, of course, is Galton, on the other hand, not Galton, Mendel, confronted with the same kind of variability, that is, individual differences, did an experimental analysis and found the causes. And out of that, we got genetics. And so I always like to ask an audience, which of these disciplines gave us the most of benefit to humanity? Genetics or mental measurements? And everybody laughs, and then that's that.
Yeah.
So I guess, that's my answer to the question of what do I mean by standards of measurement. Standard, absolute, universal, real units. Then, of course, you get into the whole question of, okay, now, what are the instruments like and what are the procedures for measurement? But all of that is secondary to the initial recognition that we have to have standard, absolute units to deal with.
In your estimation, in your experience, I should say, was there a time in behavior analysis where standards of measurement were more prominent? So when you think back to when you entered the field, do you see just a massive change in the use of standards of measurement, or
yes.
Was the field sufficiently variable that, okay, well...
No, I would say, and this is probably, very inaccurate and inexact, but I would say that in the earliest days, remember, I got in the field a little bit before Java appeared. Mm-hmm. So my early formal education in behavior analysis, aside from a seminar I had with Norm Gutman in which we read behavior of organisms, was really started in the mid-'60s after this encounter with Ogden, and I started reading the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior cover to cover. We just had to sit down and learn what was going on. Now, back then, measurement, for the most part, was frequency and cumulative records, which meets all the standards. Now, remember, well, you don't remember because I haven't said this yet. I was trained by Greg Kimball, but my area of interest was respondent conditioning, eyelid conditioning, and of course I read Pavlov in great detail and was very impressed with how Pavlov went about measurement of the single case. And, it comes together now many years later, but one of my more, I think, important accomplishments as a graduate student was to develop a much better and more sensitive measure of the human eye blink, which I did publish in Science. So, others thought that was a worthy contribution. I will never forget the experience of presenting that study at the psychonomics meeting, not the one I met Og at, but one a couple years later, and having very distinguished people from the field saying, I don't know what to make of that. I'll have to wait till it gets published so I can see what others think. I said, oh, Christ. What is this field I've gotten into? I mean, that, if you have a question, you can pick up the phone and call me. We can talk about it. You have to wait till it goes, oh, my God. I mean, that was one of the big nails in the coffin of traditional psychology for me. I mean, these were distinguished and important people. So it just, but anyhow, that was an example. I saw it as somehow, it wasn't as, I couldn't state it as clearly then as I can now, but I saw it as really not honoring the phenomenon for us to do percentages of trials on which eye blinks occurred or didn't occur. The percent CR measure struck me as very, very crude compared to what I could see coming out of the polygraph as tremendous variability. And I could see that we were doing things that would change that variability in orderly ways, and there was no way of picking that up with a percent measure. So, way, way before I even met Og, I was into that kind of concern with effective measurement.
As you're talking, I am also jotting down notes for my things that I'm going to follow up with, because this is just really, the things that you say probably don't just resonate with me, but so many others that are interested in our field and what we do, because, well, just the whole notion of variability in order and how things change when those of us in our field, whether you're in psychology or education, that's primarily what we're interested in.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to maybe switch topics here and ask you a couple of questions that I've been thinking about for some time. One thought that I had that is probably going to be more relevant to now and the future, but what are your thoughts on paper charts versus computer charts? It seems when you look at AIM chart and all the different applications, if you can truly represent the standard chart on a computer, is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, it's a real good question, because I have vacillated on that for some time. My earliest impressions of this whole issue came, I think, back at the time that we went to that first short course, and people were, even back then, trying to figure out ways to get data input into the computer and let the computer do the charting, because teachers were having so much trouble with the time and it took and so forth and so on. Well, what we noticed right away was that process, whatever form it took, came between the kid and the teacher. And that was tragic. And so I just took a firm position from that day forward that should never happen, and that the paper chart should be the medium of one of the media of communication between the teacher and the kids, and the computerization should take place offline, upstream, and so forth and so on. And I think I still sort of hold that position. However, I've mellowed a bit in recent years to the point that I'm probably not as rigid about letting kids have calculators in their math tests either. So maybe some of the electronic tools are ready for use, as long as, my view would be, as long as we maintain religious adherence to the function. What is that chart there for, and is it performing that function in these various guises? We know that the paper chart does. We know from watching Kent's kids do their own charts and watch their reactions to it. And kids that I did the same thing with kids teaching second graders, fifth graders, sixth graders to chart back in the when was that? In the late '60s, I guess. There's a kind of a magical thing that happens once the kid learns how to use the chart a little bit to see their own progress, and I don't ever want to see that disappear. Mm-hmm. So as long as that standard can be maintained, and of course we keep the standardization intact so that we can move. I mean, the point of the standardization is so that we can look at different charts from different people at different times and different locations and see the same thing, much as we did with the cumulative record back in the 40s and 50s. As long as those characteristics are maintained, then I don't see any real issue. I don't want to take a position on paper versus electrons. What I want to do is take positions on what is the function here and how do we preserve it and how do we improve it. And let the technology support that rather than us trying to support the technology. Does that make sense? I mean,
it does. I think your thinking is similar to part of what I've been thinking about in this issue, because what I look at, I work with schools, and you want the technology to be in the hands of teachers who are going to do something with it. And if you have an Excel sheet or something where they can just put numbers in and up pops the chart, and then they can make decisions and get the same effect from it, but that makes it them more apt to use it, then I think in that instance technology is something that's helping proliferate the chart.
I agree. Now what happened to the kid in that?
Or the kid putting it in there.
Yeah, now if the kid
sure.
can do it, or they do it together, then I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I think
although I think hard copy should exist for the kid.
That would I'm hoping that some people actually start looking at this research. When we look at, well, as the journal editor, the things that I tend to get in most of the time deal with some type of procedure that's done, and it would be great if we could start generating some more research on the chart and just the different aspects of it. I think that would really be beneficial for lots of people.
I agree.
What works well, what doesn't work well.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see,
and have some sense of what we mean by well.
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, we are approaching the end of the time. I mean, you've been very generous with our time, so I always like to ask, is there anything I should have asked you or anything else that you'd like to talk about that maybe I didn't touch upon?
You know, I thought about that for a moment when I went downstairs, and I thought of something, then I forgot what it is. But there is one other kind of idea that we might just kick out for a second, and that is, what is the real applicability of precision teaching as we know it now in contemporary public education? And maybe this is completely off the wall, but I read a chapter the other day that Owen sent me, and it strikes me that, well, the reason I'm interested in this is I struggled, as did many people for years, wondering what we can do with this. You know, you go into a school system, you get some people charting. What's going to happen here? How does this really work? Well, immediately it becomes obvious it's too much trouble, literally too much trouble for most people to do on a routine basis. And it's probably not necessary. So what is its real value? Well, I think maybe from what Owen's chapter says, what we should be using it for is the kind of intense interventions that take place when ordinary measurement isn't sufficiently sensitive. So that small percentage of kids that we want to get to and get at and get going in the right direction in the regular public school environment, they're candidates for precision teaching. And so we don't try, at least at this stage, to get everybody doing this, and because it isn't going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But it can happen, it seems to me, on a limited basis with those kids who need it most. And conversely, it seems that if it's done correctly and effectively, that's going to make a big impression on others who at least may have similar kinds of kids that need help and wouldn't have otherwise thought about doing this. So does that make sense? I mean,
it does.
It's to sort of lower our sights a little bit, but hit the damn bullseye instead of raising our sights and scattering shot all over the countryside and never hitting anything. to use the hunting analogy.
Mm-hmm. That is something that I think about quite a bit, because where I'm at and what my job is to work with teachers and working with children with special needs. Most of those are the ones who would benefit and who need precision teaching. Well, not that everyone would benefit from it, but particularly students with special needs. So that idea of really hitting the bullseye, as you point out, would not only benefit those children, but certainly might get some more people interested in what we have to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it strikes me now that most of the time we don't need this. Probably all of the time, if it were done on a, like 3-to-1 ratio, 5-to-1 ratio, something like that, we can't afford that. All kids would benefit to some extent, but most kids without it are doing pretty well. But
Mm-hmm.
there is that population down there is not doing pretty well. That's going to, in the long run, create some real serious financial and perhaps social problems. That if timely intervention early on and maintenance of that intervention would really avert all that, and that's worth doing. So I've just talked myself into going back into my granddaughter's classroom and picking out that one kid who really seems to be a big behavior problem, and seeing if I can do some work with him one-on-one with charts that will turn that around.
Yeah, that's great. I can appreciate that thought, because I'm very interested in, from my level too, working with children, and it's just really very seductive when you feel the power of what you can do with technology.
Yeah.
And what I mean by technology, or maybe that's the wrong word, the information that's been generated from our science, science of behavior.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very similar to it. It's a shame that more students can't experience it, but very similar to the real thrill that comes the first time you shaped a pigeon or a rat. And you can do this with kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about, well, I mean, of course, what's her name? Karen Pryor has demonstrated that over and over again with clicker training. And it's fun to go into a classroom of second graders or whatever and do clicker, play the clicker game with them.
Yeah, speaking of Karen Pryor, I was just the other day, I walked into Barnes & Noble, and right on the right-hand side, they have their kits. And sure enough, I saw a kit that was introduction.
For tag teaching?
Yeah, for clicker. Well, it was for clicker training, and it was like clicker train your dog, and it was like maybe $10 or $12. There was a little clicker in there, a short little book, and I just think, wow, if we could somehow get what we do to that level where we have something that's quick, easy, it's in Barnes & Noble, boy, I think we would really we'd really be onto something if we could get it down to that level.
Yeah, no question. Got to be careful with clickers with humans, of course, because everybody goes frantic, but it's absolutely true.
Well, I want to thank you again for taking your time out of this day and speaking with me. And hopefully, if you don't mind, in the future, I'd like to have you on again, because I certainly could probably talk to you for another, well, I could speak to you all day if I had the time, but I know you have things to do.
Well, listen, I've enjoyed it enormously, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
All right, thank you very much.
Very good, and if not sooner, we'll see you at ABBA.
I look forward to it.
Very good, Rick. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Hank.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that was a fantastic interview with Hank, and as usual, I've learned a number of things. With that, though, that brings us to the end of our podcast, and if, as I said before, if any of you have any comments or questions or concerns, or if you want to share some ideas with Doug and myself that will increase our fun factor, remember, that's the motto of the day. That's our new motto, fun, learning. Please make sure you let us know. So, any other comments, Doug?
You know what? None that I can think of right now. I'm sure I'll do a better job the next time, and hopefully I'll get invited back for more of these.
Doug,
maybe I'll even...
You did a fantastic job.
All right. Well, then I'm coming back, and hopefully there'll be more fun in learning and fun, whatever the actual motto was that we decided on.
All right. Well, I would like to, on behalf of Doug and myself, say goodbye to you all, and I look forward to speaking with you in our next Precision Teaching podcast.